I hear some of you think we're wrong. I mean, so Kilts did this magnificent piece last week for Bold Christian Writing on Gab, and we have been getting so much conversation, being told over and over again. I mean, activity on my channel that has not been seen since, I don't know, the last time I did something mischievous on the internet. But apparently, she raised some controversy with her argument about exactly why Paris is in flames. Now, we recognize that this is now 3 cycles ago, and you all are worrying about, oh, I don't know, tornadoes hitting Pfizer or whatever happened in the most recent Disney fiasco and stuff. But we here in the Mosaic Ark do history. And so even though it's nearly a week old, we're going to talk about it anyway. And maybe even older than that. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. Do you even remember last week? I mean, it's so long ago. In the internet time, it might as well be infinity time.
A whole eon. A whole eon of 7 days ago.
And I spent my life trying to live in the Middle Ages. It's like you guys. I'm starting to understand why this is so difficult for people to get a grip on. It's like thinking in terms of 1,000 years when people can't remember yesterday. How are we going to help them?
Well, I've had to claw my way out of a similar thought process, so and I'm still doing it. So I'm leaving little white pebbles behind me as I wander through the forest of current events to let everyone sort of find their way along with me, because I'm chronologically disabled. So I wanted to mark the moment, because it was a moment, and I just had this big feeling. I was like, I want to mark this moment. It's going to come back. It's going to happen again. And I wanted to sort of put the stamp on it before it evaporated into whatever the current thing is today.
I do feel like it's getting worse. I mean, I used to have, before COVID, had a just rock solid sense of chronology. I could remember things. I mean, there's a great scene in one of Dorothy Sayers' novels where Peter and Parker are talking to a guy who's been in an anatomy class, and they're saying, I bet you could remember, last Tuesday. And he's like, no, I couldn't. And they take him through a series of questions, and he's like, he does actually remember very, very accurately. And I'm like, oh yeah, I believe. I think I would have. Let's take our listeners back. What on earth were you talking about? Does anybody even remember? It was so long ago now. Where did the Pebbles lead to most recently?
Well, all of the rioting in France.
There was rioting?
Remember that?
No.
Remember 7 days ago? There were angry mobs burning things and looting shops, and the police couldn't contain them. Motorcycles were being stolen and driven away, and there was a guy sitting down in the middle of a town square eating a sandwich, wedged between a group of rioters and then riot police. So yeah.
Are you sure that doesn't even
right.
seem real? Are you sure they were rioting in Paris?
They were.
Oh.
Well, they were rioting somewhere in France. A few places.
I saw a
There were
library on
little
fire.
spot fires all over.
Marseille's library caught fire. Yeah.
A few buildings were lit on fire. I posted one which turned out to not be Marseille. It was somewhere in the Philippines, so I had to retract that. But,
okay, so this is our problem as historians of the internet. You know, archiving and archiving, right? Keeping actual records of things that happen, so that although the internet remembers everything, it seems to remember nothing accurately. That's a problem.
Yeah, there's no fixed memory in the internet. Everything can get recycled and reworded instantly. You know, the memory hole is real. So yeah, everyone posting everything, suddenly it can all just get deleted, and we don't have any way of tracking. Which was a big reason why I wrote the piece, because that sort of effect is the European experience in a lot of ways. And I mean, it's been the experience of Australians. We've had our entire civilizational memory of being Europeans wiped almost. And so I have to place pieces in different spots in order to figure out how we got here, but also what was going on in Europe, the Europe that we left before we started the side quest.
The side quest
that is Australia. Yeah.
But you think so? You've traveled in Europe, right? You'd think it would be easier for Europe, and we've back. Oh my gosh, it's like the anchor that we have is all these. We're at episode 51 now. We're nearly to 52. A full year's worth of mosaic arcs. And somewhere last summer we talked about memory and architecture and memory palaces and being able to anchor ourselves in nation by way of our structures. You'd think France would have an easier time of it because they've got a lot of those buildings. Well, fewer than they did last week. Because some of them caught on fire. And the thing is, I've been spoofed by some of these things too. Maybe not. I think I got confused about which library it was, and unfortunately, people are saying, the library is burning, all this knowledge is lost. I'm like, well, I hope they kept the manuscripts in a vault, because that is actually what the great libraries tend to do now with their precious books, particularly after the Germans burned Louvain Library twice. Both in World War I and in World War II. So, this phenomenon of losing their libraries in flames, sometimes they're doing it to each other, right?
Yes.
A lot of our medieval history went up in flames in World War I, and then what was left went up in flames in World War II, and the Americans kind of helped with some of that. So, maybe it is harder for them to remember, because who bombed the buildings? It's sometimes a little bit tricky to get a grip on. Yes.
Well, that's a difficult conversation, isn't it?
Well, it was topical. It was topical to your piece, right? Because certain people are blaming certain other people for being the cause for the certain things that are happening to whatever is happening in Europe. We have our first image here. It's Seinfeld solves all, right? And flames, Kramer, what's going on in France?
200 years of godless liberalism is reaching its natural conclusion.
Oh, well, we should just blame, modernity. That would be simple. But was that what people were doing?
No, they were not doing that. At least in the internet, the internet sphere that I'm circling around in and raving in, it was not godless liberalism that was to blame. It was Africans. It was the race of the people that were rioting that was to blame.
I sense it. I sense a contradiction here. Is it modernity? Just off the top of our heads and from previous episodes, we can very easily come up with contexts in which it was certain Europeans doing it to other certain Europe, and now you're saying it's Africans?
Apparently,
Explain.
7 days
Explain.
ago. Well, 7 days ago, when large groups of what looked to be African men were running through the streets of France and bashing the windows of shops, smashing glass, and raiding storefronts and libraries and other areas, causing chaos. It looked like what everyone described. Okay, this is a race war. This is Africans versus French. So I found that amusing because I've lived in Africa, and
oh, really? You mean Africans do not do this in Africa in the same way?
Well,
actually, no. We do actually have stories from Africa. For example, Rwanda, where they were quite brutal to each other. Although that was Hutu. Oh, golly, I did that's off the top of my head. The
Hutus and
Tutsis, whom I think are both black.
Yes.
Do you think you could tell them apart if you saw a Hutu and a Tutsi?
That was a really interesting race war because they both looked the same. So yeah, the Genocide Museum in Rwanda is really really something to visit. It's quite a horrible place. I've been there. And Rwanda, the country, is incredibly beautiful, and you can still feel that the nation has been very, very badly bruised by what they did to each other. But these two tribes of people are indistinguishable from one another. To foreigners, to someone who is not from Rwanda or Burundi, you would not be able to tell the difference. And they hacked each other to death with machetes. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of a race war, that's a race war. What was happening in Paris didn't look like a race war to me.
Okay, so I think we've lost all 5 of our viewers by this point. Some of which I think are us being logged in, right? Evening all. Hi Casey. Hi Mel. Casey, you're doing the spoilers again. The atheistic French government is burning France down by allowing the violence. Yes, we need to help people understand that, because what everyone has leapt to is the description that, of course, the media. And I'm not even saying I don't watch enough of the media to know which ones anybody says, because frankly, if I watch regular cable or mainstream news, my brain collapses in 3 seconds. Because they're so clearly trying to give you some version of the story that they've all agreed is the one that is the right one to tell at this moment. And that usually for me leaves out a lot of the pieces.
Well, the excuse for this one was similar to Black Lives Matter rioting in America. It was that this North African teenager had been abused by French police. And so they started a riot because of the racial abuse. And so liberal media ran with that narrative to say that the native French are racist, and this is why all of the immigrants to France are rioting, because they're in a terrible social condition and they're not being treated equally, and they're being marginalized, etc. Which is also, a narrative that I wanted to counter with this article, because I don't believe it for a second that they're being marginalized. I think something else was going on in France. I think the France that they've migrated to is the problem. It's not it's not racism.
So it is in fact 200 years of godless liberalism.
Yes.
How? Okay, so this is a tall order. How are you going to convince our listeners that that's the case? Because we have, what I said in my intro, we have gotten a lot of pushback. I mean, you instantly on your own channel got a lot of pushback. I mean, we're regularly told on Telegram that we're naive, and of course it's a race war. But I mean, it's sometimes more layered than that as well. Do you you remember anything in particular? It's like it's like, okay, so we've gotten used to like not being flooded with conversation because, well, you know, we confuse everybody so much they have no idea where to hit, right? Which is good. Which is good. We're keeping you guys guessing. Our pirate ship, you know, you're not sure whose side we're on. We're happy about that. But on this one, it felt like more people thought they could tell us we were wrong instantly. It's like, no, it is definitely race war. You're just naive that you're not seeing it.
Well, no, I'm definitely not naive. I mean,
well, you've actually lived in parts of Africa yourself, so you have a bit more context for, you know, as I live on the south side of Chicago, and so when people start talking about the way American blacks behave, I'm like, you're not describing my neighbors, so I don't know what you're talking about, right? It's like the instantaneous group description fails. So so that's a start, but maybe we have other things that we can build on.
Definitely. The first thing I'll say is that the majority of the people that have responded to my piece see race in terms of racial Bolshevism.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking as Darwinists. So they'll see identical physiognomy or a similar physiognomy, and then they'll equivocate that with race. That's not how it works in the majority of the worlds where actual race wars have happened, like Rwanda. And like in Europe, when we had the race wars called World Race War I and World Race War II.
So we should make that a thing, right? World Race War I and World Race War II. French versus Germans. Or British versus Germans. War, huh? Anglo-Saxons on one side and Saxons on the other. I mean, it's about the same as the I remember what the groups are in Rwanda until I have to say them out loud. Hutus and Tutsi.
And
right.
Tutsis,
and they are related, or they're separate? They're not. Are they as close as French and Germans or English and Germans?
Very similar. Very similar. Yeah. They'll speak. They will speak Kinyarwanda, but the tribal history. I'm not very deeply familiar with Rwandan tribal history. I can tell you what I got told by the Rwandan soldier, the 8-foot Rwandan soldier who dragged me up a volcano when we were tracing gorillas in the middle of the jungle and stepping in gorilla shit.
Oh, actually, and animal gorillas, not people gorillas. Okay.
Yeah, he was good fun. We had great chat. Very, very lovely man, and he'd been, sent all over Africa for different things, and then another friend of mine who's a Greek expat, because the Greeks have been in Africa forever. So he was in Burundi during the genocide, and he had some stories about friends of his that didn't have limbs left and all sorts of things going on. So I've spoken to people that lived through that experience directly. And then I've also spent time with them enough to understand what their conceptions of race are and how the people there really don't see it in terms of color. They see it in terms of tribe or your language group, and then your religion. And the idea of Europeans that are reacting to an article like mine or having a discussion about race, forgetting that Europe itself is a racial patchwork in the same way that Africa is a racial patchwork, they're missing out on all the elements that would contribute to these kinds of conflicts that are ethnic conflicts. I'm not saying they're not ethnic, but they're not racial. So in somewhere like Rwanda, you've got a country with tribal tensions and it gets cranked up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very purposefully cranked up. And the media were involved in this because as we've studied with the McLuhan and his insights on the power of radio, radio hits the tribal feeling very, very deeply. And Africa was a radio continent, and the radio stations in Rwanda were responsible for the genocide because they were stoking all the ethnic tension to get everybody so tense to the point where they thought that they needed to go and kill their neighbors. So Yeah, it works differently in sub-Saharan Africa. Ethnicity works differently than the way that the people on the internet that have responded to this article are describing.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say it's Africans versus Europeans, they don't really understand what they're talking about. And I wanted to explain why. But it's going to take some time and a little bit of patience from everybody, because this is not it's not an Enlightenment perspective on things. So
So we need some more history, is what you're saying. Oh,
yeah.
That's true.
We have to go back further than 7 days ago.
Yes, right, exactly, and even 70 years ago, right?
Yes. Yep. Pre-race war, pre-world race war one.
Pre-world race war one. As you're just as another. So one, we have to say what you said about the radio in Africa is very important. We just ran a search in my department for an African historian, and I think I mentioned this on one of our streams, that one of the talks was about the radio and the significance of the radio in Kenya, I believe. I've forgotten the talks, but the colleague we've hired works on the military regimes of post-colonial Africa. And one of the great takeaways that I have from his work already is many of those people were trained in Sandhurst, or the equivalent in Britain, right? They're actually militarily trained as English. So the kind of, sort of intermixing, we're saying that the ethnicities and the tribes and the nations and the languages are much more complicated in sub-Saharan Africa than most people know in the north. But likewise, the colonial experiences of, Belgium and the Congo and England and Kenya and Zimbabwe and the French in Algeria and the Italians not in Ethiopia because they got kicked, they didn't win. All that Europe has created a complexity in Africa's relationship with Europe that, again, people tend not to be talking about. So maybe you're going to tell us something about Francis, yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I got a guy here. Yeah. I got a guy here, and he's in a red jacket, and he's got some fluffy black hair and ruddy cheeks.
Oh yeah.
Who is he?
That's my boy. That's Alexander Dumas.
Wait, you mean like Three Musketeers? Dumas? One for all and all for one? Wait, that's a French story, isn't it?
It is. Because he's French.
I'm so confused.
Well, I'm going to mispronounce probably everything that's French in this because I can't say French things, which is embarrassing.
That's okay. I can't either. We just say them in endearing accents and pretend that
I'm going to Australize everything. So this is Alexander Dumas, and I focused on him. He was my anchor for this article. I love his stories, and he's quite a wonderful storyteller. But the interesting thing about his perspective is that Dumas comes from a family that represent the French colonial vending machine. So I've talked a lot about the vending machine people. What is a vending machine? It's an imperial system, an imperial power. We have the Anglosphere as a vending machine. France had its own francophone vending machine. France became an empire that started up colonies all over the place, not just in Africa. And so Alexander Dumas, his family are colonials. They're people that have gone outside of the national border of France to serve or trade within this French vending machine. And in the process of leaving the borders of France, what we would now recognize as modern France, blended with people beyond the national border.
You say blended.
The French nation.
Blend. How do you
blended?
How do you blend?
Married.
Ooh, do you really? Okay, now we have the full set.
Maybe
of them.
not even married.
Their family, but the family Dumas.
Yeah.
They blend, do they? Is that like they rub off and turn different colors?
Well, I believe there's a lot of French kisses that happened before. And in a previous
so I say my department has done Africa history searches several times, and one of my previous colleagues was working on, is Gambia one of the French colonies? Is that right?
Gambia
Or French Guinea?
so, yeah.
That
No, Guinea definitely.
well, anyway, on the West Coast, and one of the things she talked about was, in fact, the way in which the local women marry the French.
Yes,
that could happen, and that they, I mean,
well,
and in her account, they actually, they set up families, and they are. After it's so complicated to look at the Europeans trying to, quote, bring civilization and radios and roads and things like that into Africa, but that they also they participate in the culture in Africa. And also, you would say, is it in Haiti, or where is Dumas' ancestors from?
Yes, what's called Haiti now. No, but this was always part of colonialism. Like, people don't really think about colonialism beyond British colonialism. That's been my big pet beef with this whole discussion. So now we're talking about French colonialism, but the colonialism started in ancient worlds. Colonialism is Mesopotamian. It's literally city-states trying to become empires by taking over other city-states. It happened all over the place. Then you build an empire, then you start gobbling up other city-states, and boom, you've got a colony. And the Greeks did the same thing. When the Greeks started to send Greeks out, Greeks just did it themselves. It wasn't like a formal thing of, the British Crown saying, all right, well, we're going to start a formal colony somewhere. Greeks just ran all over the place, jumped in a boat, went YOLO to the other side of the Mediterranean. And the men were the ones doing this. They left the women at home. Well, when you arrive in a new place and you're starting up a colony, where are you going to get your women from? You got to go native.
Well, Paris tried stealing Helen from what's his name? I mean, sometimes you steal them from other men.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Like the Romans did with the Sabine women, famously, right? They have Aeneas has shown up from Troy and has no women, and so they steal some.
That's a polite way of putting it.
Stealing, rape, is that we can we use that? Yeah. It's me seizing, right? So they take the Sabine women.
Yeah, they just took them. It was really gives me that, like Roman style. They just took all their women because they didn't have any women. Because at the time, Rome was, a village, and they needed women to populate Rome. So they saw some babes across the across the 7 hills and decided to take them, and that was it. And then the children became Roman. There wasn't a consideration of where the women came from. It was, where's your father from? Paternity, patriarchy, the paternal line. So something very similar happened in the Dumas family, which is where I started the piece, to consider what happens first off when a nation becomes an empire. It breaks its national boundaries because it has to send people outside of the national boundaries. So once a French person leaves France and then they're moving outside into a colony, there's a really interesting problem there, because are you really dealing with a nation anymore, or are you dealing with empire? Once that happens, then you're going into territory of Dumas family politics, which changes everything. And that's why I wanted to settle the thought of France and being French in the mindset of Alexander Dumas, because I think his mentality is the best way of clarifying the problems that are going on now in France.
Okay, so you said something about his grandfather.
Yes. His father. Yeah, it was his father. So Dumas' father, the same name. It's a big long French name.
Yeah, and Alexander Dumas' son is this. Are they all the same names? It's like this.
I think they're just photocopied.
Anyway, one Dumas after the other.
Not really.
And the first one, the one on the horse, is somewhat darker. I mean, and of course, and Dumas himself. Yeah. It depends on. I mean, it's interesting having photographs and saying whether or not they look dark, right? But Dumas was considered. We would now consider him black. Yes.
In America, he would be considered black. Yeah. again, because racial politics change depending on the vending machine you're dealing with. But in the American vending machine, he would be considered black. In the Arabian vending machine, that would depend on his religion. And then, in the French colonial vending machine, we have different rules again. So the father Dumas, he is born in one of the French colonies, which is now called Haiti. His mother was a slave concubine that was acquired by the family. This again is something that I think is going to make people very uncomfortable on whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. But she was purchased by the French family, and then Alexander Dumas Sr.'s father had a child. So
that was his mother, Dumas' mother.
It's his mother.
Was a slave.
Yeah, Dumas. She was a slave.
So you're telling me that the Frenchman who's responsible for such classics as The Count of Monte Cristo, which Jim Caviezel played in, right?
Yes.
And the Three Musketeers, which everyone uses typically as an image of banding together as knightly or not doing this swordsman warriors, although they're musketeers. So why would why did they have swords? Who knows? Was a son of a slave.
He was the grandson of a
slave. Yeah, that's why I said it's like his grandfather. So, okay, never mind. I've lost.
No, sorry.
Dumas, the author, is the grandson of a slave.
Yes,
right.
Yes, that was his grandmother.
Got it.
His paternal grandmother.
Which he knew. He knew this?
Yes, he knew.
Did he deny it?
No.
Interesting.
No. It is interesting. It is very interesting.
So he's writing these grand French epics with full knowledge of who his grandmother was.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Interesting. Glorifying France, you might say.
Yeah.
I'm just going to rub this in until you guys pay attention to what she said.
No, I know. I'm enjoying it, actually.
No, it's like I think this came up. We were talking about Bridgerton a few episodes, a bazillion ago, right? It's like this problem of I've been thinking about this now too. The degree to which somehow, I don't know, sometime in the early 20th century, Europe whitewashed itself from its own past.
Yeah, it did.
So that you can see in its art and in family relations of the the great period of European expansion, how mixed it all was. Indeed. And it's like we've this amazing amnesia, thanks to I'm not sure what, that even European, it's like I learned this when we were doing our Kanye West episodes, that his mother wanted to do a course on Pushkin, because Pushkin was one of these child or grandchild of former slave in Russia. Yeah, so there's a bunch of them, and we think of them as quote European. And often, the great writers, the great, creators of European culture have these mixed lineages.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it's not tokenistic, because this is more common than people would like to admit.
Right.
If you're a colonial and you're outside of a motherland, which is what we are down here in Australia, this is far more common than people are willing to talk about. I think it's because of Darwin, personally. I think Charles Darwin is responsible for this.
Yes, that would time it correctly. That suddenly people are worrying about idiotic fractions.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Racial fractions become a part of the Darwinist mentality because they believe in blood quantum, which is something I've posted about on my channel. But Australasians, like Maori people from New Zealand and Australian Aboriginals, don't believe in blood quantum. They believe in tribal lineage. And it's not just them. I mean, this was common in Europe also. I mean, it's also the Arabian mentality. You don't believe in blood quantum, you believe in paternal lineage.
Right.
The Jewish people do the same thing with the matriarchal lineage. They believe in a maternal line. If you have a Jewish mother and a Goy father, a non-Jewish father, you're classed as a Jew. If your father is Jewish and your mother is a Goy, then you are not considered a Jew. So these kinds of racial inheritances change depending on the culture and the nation or the tribe that you're dealing with. And this is a flexibility that is not allowable within a Darwinist system because they believe in blood quantum and racial fractions. Once this was introduced, it was weaponized against the colonial subjects of the British Empire. And the English did this very, very famously against the Irish, who were, according to Charles Darwin, below the Negro. So for anybody on the internet who wants to have a conversation about Negroid blood being infused into the European populations, they have to deal with the fact that the Irish were considered below Negroes at one time.
This is our joke earlier about the World War I and World War II being race wars is totally accurate.
It really was.
Really were, because they're eugenics wars.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the Second World War was, and everybody knows that. But that it only works within this kind of quote scientific mythology.
Yeah. If you treat the human experience as a laboratory, and suddenly everything becomes empirical and everything becomes a consideration of measurement and control, then this is what you get. This is not Catholic.
Right. So tell us more about the general and who he was. Okay. And then he's got a very interesting predecessor that you pointed us to as well, which I, as a medievalist, am horrifically embarrassed to say I never paid attention to. Thank you. My pigeon has now become my teacher. She has come.
I finally said something she doesn't already know.
It's like no, the thing is, no, even better than that. It's not just something I didn't already know, because you know lots of stuff about Australia. You show me something I didn't know about my own territory. I'm like, it's boys and girls. This is what should happen. Your students should teach you stuff that you should have known. It's brilliant. Anyway, but
it's good fun. It's good
fun.
No,
seriously, I was like this. I'm reading it, going, "Oh, she's nailed it! It's great! Oh my gosh, A plus.
Well, I mean, I don't know the world through formal education. I know the world through wandering through it. And and I think this is possibly why I like pick up on things, because I just noticed them as I was wandering through, you know. I was hitchhiking on the back of motorcycles in Rwanda and talking to people about the genocide. I mean, for me, this was like, this is naturally how we think, oral history.
Right.
You know, I ask people what's going on. And so I did the same thing when I was in Europe, and kind of wandering around, noticing things and seeing, okay, there's another town called St. Maurice. There's another building called St.
First finish telling us about Dumas. Now I've got to keep you on track.
Yeah, you have to. So
tell us about Dumas' dad, and how amazing it is that he did what he did, and that will then prepare them for the amazingness of Samoritz.
Okay. So Dumas Senior, he is born in Haiti. He's born in the colony, and his father decides that he wants to bring him back to the motherland, France, to be educated and integrated properly into French society, because, I mean, Americans may not know this, but when you're still like formally a colonial subject of an imperial power, there is a sense of being inferior to the motherland. You know, Australians are kind of like the retarded offspring of Great Britain. We don't know anything about British society whatsoever. Our accent is wonky. We don't really speak English properly. We have no conception, no understanding of the civilization that created this place. Like none.
Well, we're a colony too. That we just have so much hubris that we've tried to pretend that we don't.
You have that party that you throw every year that denies it. But anyway.
I watched. So I had occasion to get to watch not the fireworks this time, but the CNN version of the fireworks for hours. They went on for hours. I had no idea this fireworks in Washington D.C. went on for a whole hour, and the ones in New York City went on even longer. And then CNN, where it's going on. I think we're in serious denial here if we have to have that many fireworks. Because it really felt like we were trying to convince ourselves of something. Okay, so they want to come back to the motherland and belong.
Well, if he raises his son in the colony, he's just going to be he's going to get as much education and cultural exposure to France as you can in a colony, which is limited. So he takes his son Alexander and they move to France. He takes him back to France. Then he's educated and then integrated properly into the French society. This is where it gets really interesting.
But he's got dark
This
skin.
boy-
He looks like a cast member at Bridgerton.
Oh, he's very dark.
Yeah. This is the dad, right? Not yet the author. This is the dad as a young man.
This is his father. Yeah, the dad is a young man. No, he's not high yellow. He's not passing. He's very, very dark. With his West African descended slave mother.
Yep.
You know, he's very black.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So apparently this doesn't hinder him whatsoever in France. Now, this is
As long as
really
you can dress
part.
right and have a proper Parisian accent, you're fine? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he dressed so well. You know, he put on a uniform
Woohoo!
for France. And then rose through the ranks of the French military and ended up running the thing.
My goodness! Diversity in the army. No, wait.
Yeah.
Now I'm really confused.
Well, there was no affirmative action.
Ah.
This was not a charitable thing. This was not an extension of pity on somebody who needed a leg up because of his dark skin tone. The French at that point in time were completely disinterested in that kind of nonsense because they had an empire to run. They wanted men with capacity and ability, and they had a military that ran on merit. But Alexander Dumas Sr. was the best of the best. He ended up running the army. So this is a fascinating plot twist of this film. Because we've got the son of a slave who's running the French army. Apparently no one cares. Apparently nobody cares because the French aren't saying that they don't want to follow him at all.
Right.
They're willing to follow him all over the Mediterranean. Following his orders, being told what to do, being screamed at. Apparently he had a bit of a Gordon Ramsay personality and used to fight with everybody, including Napoleon, who he's recorded as having a fight with. And Napoleon had so much respect for him, he called him I forget the surname, says my memory now. But the Horatio Cochleys of the Tyrol, I think it was. This phrase, this way of basically saying he was comparable to this ancient Roman who saved Rome from destruction. That's how important Alexander Dumas Sr. was to Napoleonic France. The Austrians feared him. He was incredibly respected military strategist. They called him the Black Devil. Now, this is not politically correct. We're dealing with a time period where we're not using euphemisms over people's appearance.
Right.
And couching it in soft language. He was called the Black Devil, but it was a mark of respect. He had the allegiance that he needed within the army to do what he needed to do, and so he was sent all over the Mediterranean, Egypt, the Levant.
And people didn't get confused
Greece
there
also.
because he was black and
No.
Yeah. Interesting.
No. Apparently French manners, language, and a uniform were sufficient to mark him as French.
Cool. Okie dokie. Wait, I mean, it's like the famously racist French. I'm really confused now.
It's very confusing.
I did. So I actually have a colleague who has worked on Haiti in this period, and I confess to you, I sent him the article. He has not yet responded. I think he's on holiday or something like that. But there'll be footnotes, right? But thus far, everything that Kilts is saying fits with what I know from my own. Like, I keep footnoting myself, saying this matches what proper historians understand about this period. Guys,
well, I'm glad. Look, I know they had the Code Noir, and I didn't want to get into that because for me, I'm not thinking in color. I'm thinking in paternity. I think in lineage. So I'm not interested in what they were doing with the other quote unquote black French. I'm looking at how a French man integrates his black son into France and creates such a giga chad that this boy ends up running the French army. This is what fascinated me about the story. There was no there was no hang up in Alexander Dumas's mind that the French had enslaved his mother, that his mother was a slave concubine, that he needed to somehow get back at France. Nothing. He served it.
Yeah.
So this was a really fascinating thing. And then I sort of wanted to look more at how the family functioned, but also think, okay, well, this is the man who gave birth to Alexander Dumas, the novelist. And what that would have, well, he didn't give birth to him, obviously, the wife did, but he married a French woman. Again, wasn't considered race mixing. He just married another French person. And his son becomes a novelist who really defines French storytelling for quite some time. And then I'm thinking,
day,
okay, so
I mean, it's there's Dumas and there's Victor Hugo, but it's like, who else, right? It's they are, and I was reading a novel called The Club Dumas, which I think we talked about in some other context because Johnny Depp is in the movie. Well, anyway, Dumas wrote an astonishing number of novels, right? 5 in the year that he published Three Musketeers or something like that. I mean, it's like ridiculous, right? He had helpers and, you know, ghostwriters and partners and things like that, but he was incredibly prolific. So he just defined French storytelling for the 19th century, and Hugo is of that same, you know, practice in terms of his I'm not sure Hugo is quite as prolific, but they're doing this in the period in which France is defining itself through story, and it's Dumas doing it, and his, you know, father was the son of a slave.
Yeah, which is amazing. French identity has been formed by that kind of mind.
Or maybe it hasn't. Maybe they don't read Dumas anymore. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, maybe that's the problem. So, why not reading Dumas?
Why are they not reading? Okay, now you can tell us about. I'll bring my next. This man who he's in armor and he's got this garland on his head, but he's definitely black. This is a 16th century painting, I think. This is the great image. Who is this black man in armor talking to a bishop?
This is one of our most beloved saints. Ours meaning the Copts, obviously, but in the world at the time that he was marching in that armor, there were no schismatic distinctions between the Apostolic Catholic Church. This is Saint Maurice of Thebes.
Thebes. Maurice, which Thebes?
Thebes of Egypt.
Thebes of Egypt. Interesting.
Yeah.
Not Thebes of Greece.
No.
Thebes of Egypt.
No. Thebes of Egypt.
Represented as black.
So.
In a European painting.
Because.
Okay, can you hear the sounds of the heads exploding?
Well,
tell us, please. And this is where I got
wash the brains off the walls.
So this is hilarious, and I do want to nail this down for you all. How cool this is, right? There are lots of saints in Europe, and I have studied. I mean, this is what Kilts has achieved. All right, I had the very first graduate level class I had with my dissertation advisor was on hagiography, right, on the stories of the saints. The study of the saints in my field is a huge deal, right? I've been trained by people that did local studies of very particular saints. I've read. Okay, I work on St. Mary, but Mary was always a little bit outside of this particular. Like, these are historical people who have cults of veneration and liturgy throughout European medieval history, and somehow I never paid attention to this one. And it's not because he's black. I just didn't realize Saint Mauritius of Thebes was actually a little bit important in the European imagination. Please tell us. Here, let's go. Well, let's go to the earliest represent. I did know this particular sculpture. This is a Magdeburg Cathedral, and he's definitely black in this one.
Oh, he's very black.
Yes, this is in Germany.
He's very black.
I love this. This is in Germany. which by the 20th century will be
Isn't it
worried
great?
about, oh my goodness, being blonde, right? This is on Magdeburg Cathedral in Germany. It's from the mid 13th century, earliest, full representation. But that's also when sculpture becomes like this kind of figural level of detail. Please tell us about Mauritius. I'm gonna like play with my setup here, make him bigger. Just a sec. Keep talking. I'm gonna make him bigger for you guys.
Yes. Saint Maurice. So the name has two competing origins. People have said that it means slightly different things. They think it comes from the Greek meaning black, mauron, but it doesn't matter. So
it doesn't matter because in the Middle Ages they thought that was the etymology, right? So that
yeah.
By the 13th century, when they make this sculpture, that's what they think. His name means black.
Yeah, it's basically like if we called somebody Negro and we said Saint Negro. Mm-hmm. So etymologically, it's basically the exact same thing. So this is why I was like, oh, wow, okay, Europeans, you guys need to remember what you used to.
Yeah, but this is even better than just having a black saint on your cathedral.
Yeah. So Maurice, Saint Maurice, he came from an area of Egypt called Thebes. Now, everyone says, oh, this is blackwashing. The Egyptians aren't black. They've been really angry with the Netflix Cleopatra because they've made her black and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so for everyone out there who needs to understand this, Egypt is Egypt. Egypt is not black. Egypt is not white. Egypt is Egypt. It's its own thing. You can have an Egyptian who looks like I do in terms of like high, pasty, like porcelain-looking person. And you can have an Egyptian who looks like Saint Maurice. It depends on the region that they're from in Egypt. It depends on if they're from Lower or Upper Egypt, and different towns will have, various tones of Egyptians. Normal, very normal in the ancient world. So Saint Maurice, he comes from a place called, which was renowned for having very dark-skinned population. An entire legion of soldiers were taken from Thebes. That were called the Theban Legion, that he was captain of. The reason for this is because they were Christians, and this was during the era of the Diocletian persecution. There was a Roman emperor, a European Roman emperor called Diocletian.
He's actually Yugoslavian. I think Diocletian came from Split, right? His palace is in Split, so.
Split.
I always thought that's the funniest place name.
It's just weird, isn't it? I come from Split. He hated Christianity. He hated Christians. So he ordered this legion to leave Egypt and to serve in the Roman military. They were ordered to march all over Europe. They ended up getting sent to Gaul. Gaul is what is now known as France. So Maurice and his boys are renowned military men. They're very pious. The Romans understand this. So as they're marching, they're being asked to make sacrifices to Roman deities. As they're marching, they're suddenly asked to demonstrate their loyalty to Caesar over Christ. The Theban Legion, being African Egyptian Christians, refuse because their primary allegiance is to Christ. It was not to the emperor. And so they said, they would render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and they will render unto God what is God's. So they refused. The Romans, in response to their refusal to make their sacrifices to Roman gods, decided that they were going to decimate the legion. Decimation was a practice in Rome where every 10th soldier in a legion was killed until everybody decided to obey orders. So the legion was decimated. They still refused. The legion were decimated again. This kept happening until they were all dead. And the entire legion, including Saint Maurice, gained their crowns of martyrdom, refusing to bow to Rome. Now,
and also, I think in one of the stories I read, refusing to kill Christians. They were brought into to put down Christian rebels, and they refused that as well.
Yes, yes. They wanted to serve Rome to be able to protect other Christians within Rome. They refused to kill fellow Christians. And so their ultimate allegiance was to Christ. Now, this is something that, the people on the internet looking at the French situation would find very confusing. We have European Romans that are slaughtering Christians from Africa. The roles are reversed here in this story. Who was doing a race war? And for Christians now in this era, it would be a very shocking thing to realize that at that time, the Christian soldiers were the Africans. They were the ones carrying Christianity through the Alps. They were the ones carrying Christ through Europe, as Rome was trying to extinguish it from the empire there. So Saint Maurice, he gained martyrdom, and he gained that crown, and it impressed Europe so much that he became a very important saint for Europe when considering its identity as a Christian place.
Oh, really? So this is
yes.
not. See, this is the thing. Is I think if that kind of story, it's like, yes, during the Diocletian persecution, and of course there's lots of people slaughtered and stuff, and the Theban Legion is one of these collectives of martyrs, and yeah, okay, of course. Yeah. Tell us about this sword.
Nah. This is where it gets really good.
So he's a soldier who refuses to worship refuses to worship the Roman deities and refuses to kill Christians. And so he's honored as, and we saw in the Magdeburg image, I'll go back to that for a second. He's in the Magdeburg image, he's in mail, right? So he's a soldier, right?
Yeah.
But there's this sword of his. This is at this point where I just die of shame for not knowing this. All right, because mere Diocletian level martyrs are a dime a decim.
Well, there were a lot of them.
There's a lot of them.
I mean, it wasn't.
They stole them in the Merovingian, the Carolingian period, and Einhard brought a few up to or his own private chapel and stuff. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you say you died during the Diocletian persecutions, it's like, oh, okay, buddy, join the club.
There's a big club of them.
That's how bad it was, right? It was really
and
bad.
Golden Legends is full of them. So of course I ignored it. However, this sword.
Yeah. So, okay. So basically, Maurice now he's spilled his blood on European soil. Now, us Copts, we say the church is watered by the blood of the martyrs. We consider martyrdom to be the nourishment of Christ's church. It's not the end. This is how it grows. The more Christ is persecuted, the more he takes over. The more the church is persecuted, the more the church grows. So where the Theban Legion lost their lives, European soil, their blood springs a cult, of veneration. And Europe wants to give its homage to Saint Maurice for showing them Christ, because that's what he did. So you start to see churches popping up everywhere. You start to see different towns being called Saint Maurice or Moritz or Maurizio, depending on the local language and culture. And his cult grows, and it's traveling all the way through Europe, and it goes everywhere.
This is what you noticed when you were traveling around, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because one of my grandparents' name is Maurice, so the French have not lost this homage, and we're kind of wandering around Europe doing what we're doing, and then you start to notice after a while, like, wow, they really liked this guy. Why? So where this story gets really interesting,
it's like noticing lots of places are called St. Peter's, right? It's like that. That's what you write. That's what you talk about in the article. It's like it's. With 650, according to Wikipedia that I did read now, like 650 convents. There's a lot of dedications to Maurice.
Yeah. It wasn't just a local phenomenon around the area that he was
Right,
martyred
which is
in.
typical of a lot of those early stories. Like you'll get a local
Yeah.
cult, Santubaldo and Gubbio, for example, who was later. But anyway, it's like, and again, that's why it was my mistake thinking, oh, Maurice, he's just a number of other saints. You're not telling about the sword. You're teasing us now.
Sorry, I'm getting there. So okay. So
she's saving it up because it's so cool.
I mean, I just love it. It's just so funny. It's so funny. God has a very good sense of humor. So they have relics of Saint
This is
Maurice.
basically Excalibur, you guys. You realize this is like finding Excalibur and finding out you're in the presence of Arthur's sword.
Yep. They have his sword. They have Saint Maurice's sword. Who is they? Okay. Well, Christian Europe has retained his relics and shuffled them around, and they find different locations to settle in. But there's a very interesting point at which Europeans that are building the Holy Roman Empire decide to take the sword of Saint Maurice and use it as their primary sign of Christian authority in Europe. And the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire is given Saint Maurice's sword to wield to signify his authority. Now,
this is guys. This is like when King Charles was just crowned, and he's got like fancy regalia and stuff because he's symbolizing his continuity of this, right? It's like this is the Excalibur of the Holy Roman Empire. I'm dying.
Yeah. Imagine you pulling the sword out of the stone. It's that level of like
mythological pumph, right? This is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When we're talking about, World War I that destroyed it, right? This empire, that one. Yeah.
Poor Austro-Hungary.
Saint Maurice's sword. That's why he's on the cathedral at Magdeburg. He's like Dumas, general, father of France in the 19th century as the general. Maurice, the father of the Holy Roman Empire. I'm dying. It's so good.
Yeah. The Holy Roman Empire saw itself as the inheritors of Saint Maurice's mission to protect Christians. He was their guy. He is the patron of Holy Europe. You cannot have the Holy Roman Empire without the sword of Saint Maurice. Whoever holds that sword, authority, it's intimately connected with his martyrdom. So I was looking at this and I was thinking, hold on a second. They're doing what I was doing.
I'm showing them some others. Like here, this is the very, very black Maurice in gold in his outfit.
Yeah.
And here's another one of him with his banner and his shield and armor. Okay, now we're to the who he isn't, right? But this is Mohrenstrasse. Every single one of these Maurices. I'm back at the sword now. Yes. This is how important it is. I know when I'm saying, you guys, it's like the Arthurian legend for the German Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the central great Habsburg Empire, the great enemy of the Ottomans and of England.
Yes. This is
so rich.
I know, isn't it amazing? So, like, if you're looking at what's going on now in Europe and you're just thinking in colors, if you're thinking in skin colors, you are going to be so retarded that you don't even understand Europe.
Right.
It's funny, I'm looking at a book in front of me now. It's The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
But Gibbon?
Yes, Gibbons. Yeah.
Famous English mythology. Enlightened, very enlightened.
But Maurice is a part of the mythology of Europe. So you've got Germanic people picking up his sword and saying that we are going to follow him in his hagiography, in his sainthood. The idea of taking his relic is like taking him along with you on the
Right.
on the mission of what you're trying to achieve. So I was looking at this and I was thinking, if the Holy Roman Empire had this relic, if the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire wielded the sword of Saint Maurice at one time,
God, we're going to rub this in really, really hard to all you guys who worry about Germany being white. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire, Germany had Saint Maurice as its, and this was, I can't remember whether it was in your article or when I read it in the Wikipedia entry. It's in the Wikipedia entry that not only they have the sword, and it's their coronation emblem for centuries. Mm-hmm. And they know he's black because they keep portraying him that way on their cathedrals.
Yeah, it was never hidden.
Right.
It was emphasized because of his origin.
Right.
They emphasized it. So it's not just one emperor that gets coronated like this. This is a generational thing, over and over and over and over again. So it's like a record playing. Every time there's a coronation, we remember Saint Maurice. Every time there's a coronation, people are thinking, okay, what did Saint Maurice do? Why is he so important? Right. Why are we invoking him? Why do we want his patronage? It was his blood and the blood of the Theban Legion that they were asking for help, to help them to do what they were going to do. Right. Which I find fascinating to think about, that this cult of Saint Maurice was just everywhere. It was ubiquitous in Europe. Everywhere you go, there is something to do with Saint Maurice. If you really look for it, you'll find him.
Well, yeah, you had one of the street signs, the Mohrenstrasse. Right. Yes. And so then I started, because you made me aware of this, and I didn't read at least the Golden Legend in the Wikipedia entry. These particularly in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So
because they had to cross the Alps. And the Swiss developed a particular fondness for
and the Duchy of Savoy has him as their patron. I mean, it's just it's you guys look it up. It's really powerful. It's astonishing. She's right that it's much more present than, and it's just been forgotten. Right? Talk about whitewashing. Yep. Gone.
I mean, people don't remember what happened 7 days ago in France on France on fire. Imagine trying to explain this to people. This was what Europe was doing everywhere, without any shame, without worrying about being called Afrocentric, without being worried about being called anti-European liberals. European Catholics were all about Black Saint from Egypt, Saint Maurice, his veneration, and invoking him to help them to be better Christians. Right. And so looking at how he was everywhere and how people just forgot about him, then my mind started to tick over. I'm thinking, okay, so how do we get from a Europe where the Holy Roman Emperor is wielding the sword of Saint Maurice and he's everywhere, to a France that is now burning down because we've got import French versus native French, and everybody is thinking it's Africa versus Europe, and this is a race war, and this is it. And it made no sense to me. And then I started to think about, okay, what happened with the Dumas family? Why did they integrate so well that the Dumas family defined French, defined the French story in the 19th century? And it's because of this thing that France used to have and Europe used to have it, that they threw away. It's called homage. So homage is a term, like, a lot of things comes out of a cultural practice that is, it no longer exists. But homage was when serfs would swear allegiance to a feudal lord.
Actually, no, that was where I had to. It's serfs didn't do it. It's vassals. So it's actually vassals, only that serfs are just slaves of the land or peasants. That vassals swear homage. So it actually does work with your argument. It's just that little technical detail there.
Okay.
No, because
Vassals.
vassalage is at the military level, right? It's
Oh, okay. No, that makes sense. Okay, so not serfs,
serfs.
vassals. But the concept is that you swear allegiance to a higher authority.
Yes.
And that you're giving over service willingly to somebody in exchange for protection and also for some kind of coherent structure of running things, you know. Dumas, his father, had to join a military, and he had to give homage to his superior commanders until he rose through the ranks to become the head of the army. And once he did, then the soldiers under him were giving him their homage. That's how it works. It's about service. It's about recognizing authority and not trying to upend the order of authority just because you don't like the inequality of the hierarchy that you're in.
Gee, that almost sounds like, what the French did.
Yeah.
What the French did.
Well, I think Dumas would have been very keenly aware of what happens when you throw homage out of the window, because he lived in post Napoleonic France. He was living in a time where France had already had enough revolutionary problems that had caused the French identity crisis, where the French didn't really know who to give homage to anymore, because during the French Revolution
they got rid of that horrible feudalism stuff, which is what I mean. So homage comes out of it's vassalage, and therefore the homage that the vassal gives to his liege.
Yeah. The French had decided in the French Revolution that they no longer wanted to give homage to their king, and they beheaded him. And then it was chaos all the way down. So what I imagined when I was thinking about that was like, I've
got another warrior guy here. He's got an axe, and he's very decoratively scarred because I think he's an actor, but you know.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know what movie this is from.
This is from a series called Vikings.
Ooh, okay. So you're going to give us a contrast between what happens in Paris now with invaders and what happens in Paris in the 888.
Yeah. Well, my least favorite population on planet Earth. Vikings.
How can you say that? They're pirates. We're pirates. We'd be pirates. Come on. You don't like Vikings? Vikings are cool. I don't like Vikings. And you know, got long hair and braids, and this man is very like fit with no shirt on.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Well, this was the production version. You know, he didn't have any missing limbs or fingers or like a missing eye. Or
unlike your friends in Rwanda, right? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
I think these Viking guys were really good at slicing stuff off, raiding monasteries, stealing people, and selling them as slaves down south in the Mediterranean. Yes. They even set up a whole route through Eastern Europe. Eventually.
Yep. That's why I don't like Vikings.
So the word that we have for slave comes from group in Eastern Europe who must have kind of looked pale, and they were being sold to people across the Mediterranean by Italians, because the Venetians and wait, okay, I think we found some more history.
We found some more. So now
the raiding, pillaging barbarians are north.
Yeah, the Northmen. The Scandinavians.
Normans. There, fixed it for you.
Yeah. They became Normans eventually.
Wait, I thought the Normans were French. Normans.
Well, Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
So we've got Vikings that are raping and rampaging their way all across Europe.
Mainly in
And
France, right?
mainly in France, yeah.
They and even
Yeah.
so much. I think you had a nice drawing here. Okay, here is a map of the Norman conquest. That's different. This is when the Normans take over England, right? But no, we have a picture here. Oh
Yes.
no, that's Rollo. We'll get back to him. This one is what I'm looking for. When they and that castle was not there. But in 888,
I don't even know what was
when
there. I was
it's
like,
not it, no, this drawing is hilarious and it's got like fire and stuff, but the Vikings are coming up the Seine, and famously they attack Paris in 888. The Parisians managed to push them off, but they get all the way up to Paris, and it's like it's only a little island of a city up at that point, and the Vikings make it to Paris.
Yep, they got all the way in there.
Pretty much heartland,
no
right? If you guys know any French geography.
I'm trying to think of like a similar thing because we don't have inland cities here, so it would be difficult to sort of give a comparative
St. Louis.
in Australia.
How about that?
Cities
St.
port
Louis.
cities.
You made it all the way up the Mississippi to St. Louis.
Yeah. They were not welcome. They were not liked. No one said, "Oh, look, there's our European neighbors. They've come to say hi." No,
they're the same color as us.
Like, yeah, no one cared. So they plagued France for long enough, and then finally, one of the Viking leaders, Rollo,
go back to him,
decided to make a treaty with the French, French, at the time, who were the French.
The French barely exist. They basically had that little island that we had the Vikings sacking, right? It's like, guys, France is the Ile-de-France, which is the royal territory for a lot of the early Middle Ages. After Charlemagne's grandsons divide the territory up, and then they were sacked by Vikings. And yes, I did. No, I don't think. I think when I did my medieval history video, I didn't go into all of this, but it's complicated. By the 11th century, France is basically the immediate region around Paris. There's not much of it left. And Rollo, we'll go back to Rollo. Here he is. Rollo has made a bargain with the French king to stop pillaging part of his territory.
Well, Rollo was
in 911. Go to the map now.
Rollo just went YOLO and said, "All right, I'll become French." Or something
more like they just settled down. They just stayed in northern France, which is now Normandy.
Yep. He converted.
You guys remember where Normandy is, right? It's where the Allies landed to go fight the Germans.
Yep. Rollo became Norman. He became what was then now known as Normans from Normandy. They settled. They took over that little region of France. And
then 150 years later took over England. So there you go.
But I thought this was hilarious. I thought it was really funny because we've got Scandinavians invading Europe in areas where previously we've had homage to Saint Maurice, who's a black man from Egypt. And then it all just gets very, very complicated. You cannot think of these stories in terms of the 19th century borders of Europe because it hides all of it.
Or the Darwinian claims about race. I think that's an incredibly important point that you made. That if we want to date the amnesia over this history, it's Darwinian. That makes sense.
Yeah,
because this is you say this is why I keep getting into so much trouble with my colleagues, particularly in the American history, because most historians in the American history profession generally work on the 19th and 20th centuries, now 21st, right? It's like they just don't know medieval history or early modern history for that matter. And for them, race is a very real problem because of the language that develops in the late 19th century to talk about people. And so they're saying, how can you not know how awful this was? I'm like, well, one, because I'm not reading the texts you are in your context, and because I don't see it in the stories that I'm reading, because they're not worrying about it in the same terms. They're worrying about Normans sacking their monasteries. Yeah.
Well, they didn't have a Charles Darwin.
Right.
They didn't. Europe hadn't been spoiled by Darwinism yet. So the way that I, the reason I titled the article was, it was my homage to Ye for his song, Niggas in Paris. And I thought, what would that be? What would that look like to those people that long ago? Well, it wouldn't be niggers in Paris. It'd be Normans in Paris. That was their like racial conception at the time. It was invasion by barbarism, an invasion by barbarians that were ransacking monasteries. Right. And then that's their focus. That's their worry. That's their race war. The same way that the Holy Roman Emperors are wielding the sword of Saint Maurice as their patron, and the cult that surrounded him, and why that was, it's because they weren't thinking in race; they were thinking in sainthood.
Yes.
And so,
I mean, also just as a setup during this period, I actually, my brother was starting to read about John Mandeville and Prester John. They're also, ironically, throughout the period, particularly in the 12th century, expecting there to be a great Christian king on the opposite side of the Muslims, and they're perfectly expecting him to be black or Asian. If he's not in Asia, he's in Ethiopia. So thinking in terms of sainthood rather than race is the way medieval Christians thought. And if they think in terms of ethnicity, so the French hate the English, yes, but that's not what the race war, it's always been this way, you're just denying reality, arguments that we're seeing online are.
No, it hasn't always been this way. It hasn't. Rwanda proves that. There's no way that the radio transmissions could have jacked up that ethnic tension to the level of a genocide if it's always been this way. That is a lie. Sub-Saharan Africa wouldn't have had race wars if it was always this way. That makes no sense. There is no such thing as Pan-African identity in Africa. That does not exist. This is an American fiction. This is something that's been concocted by racial Bolshevists that want to amalgamate disparate populations into a controllable political bloc.
Yep.
And so if you're going to talk with these terms, then you'll get the outcome that the people that are doing this are setting you up for. But it's not going to be a Christic Europe. It's not going to be the return to tradition. Let's go back to European Christianity society, because they didn't think like this. They thought in a way that meant that the most important saint for the Holy Roman Empire was a black man. Like, you can't, if you're not picking up Saint Maurice's sword in your mind and understanding that this is how you have to go on a kind of crusade against the modernity amnesia that has made everyone completely retarded, including myself, because I'm a colonial subject. We've been badly retarded by this conditioning. Australia is a product of Darwinism applied to engineering.
Isn't there a town named Darwin down there?
We've got an entire city called Darwin up north in the Northern Territory. Yeah. So we had it bad here. It's badly damaged our culture, because what it's done is it's put this racial Bolshevism between people that should otherwise be thinking in the way that the Holy Romans did. And in terms of being able to create a Christian society or a Christian nation, you cannot rely on Darwinism to form a Christian nation. It is anti-Christian. It is anti-Christ. So if you want a Christian nation, you have to start thinking like Holy Romans.
So yes, and I'm looking for the other women, the Black Madonnas in the pictures, but now we got heads on spikes, right? And to say this is to say more. It's like we get to this. It's like here the Normans are sacking Paris, and wait, what did the French do to each other in 1789?
Horrifying. It was a Tarantino film. I said it in the article. What the French did to each other was worse than a Quentin Tarantino movie. The Red Terror was real. It was bloodbath. They destroyed France.
Well, this
idea,
image of these
like,
heads on pikes. I think it's like the first time that happens is when they storm the Bastille. It's like they haven't been in revolution for 2 or 3 years. They do it like basically straight up.
Yeah.
And they capture the commander of the Bastille, chop his head off. There's 6 or 7 other people with him. They chop their heads off, parade around Paris with their heads on spears.
Yeah, they weren't stealing motorcycles from a motorbike shop in Marseille. Like this was a real riot.
Imagine if some of the rioters last week had done this with the heads. Mm-hmm. And we'd be hearing about how it's African brutalism. Okay, you guys, it was July 14th when her article came out. No, the next day. Anyway, it was July 14th in your world when it came out, right? It was
yeah.
Bastille Day down here is celebrating heads on pikes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the French do it every year. Mm-hmm. The croissant utopia hides this fact. Because now everything is so polite and beautiful.
Heads on pikes.
Fireworks and there's a parade. It's heads on pikes. Yeah. That was the revolution.
It's so I'm trying to think, why am I so conscious of this? One is because I teach the French Revolution every other year when I teach Eurociv. This coming year I'm going to teach it again, and we're going to read these texts about how they put heads on pikes, and then they argue themselves into executing their own king, and then they argue themselves into guillotining thousands and thousands of their own people. And then let's talk about the Vendée in a bit, when they sink the ships to drown the people that they put in them because they need to execute so many Catholics at one time. The peasants who are actually resisting the city, trying to liberate them from the Ancien regime. But I think I'd say I went to a haunted house when I was like 10, and one of the exhibits it was in the mall, right, was a guillotined figure, right, and the guy in the robe and everything, like Uncle Fester kind of feeling. It's like big black robe wandering out, and I was really scared. Like stuck in my head the effect of a guillotine, which is to chop heads off.
Yeah. It's funny, the Addams Family, the kids in the second film, they're playing with one and reenacting the French Revolution. They've got Marie Antoinette being tried for treason against the French Republic. Fascinating that's the opening scene. Because that's a horror for Catholics. Right. That Republican Revolution, what that meant.
Well, it means the dissolution of not just the monarchy, but so Napoleon does restore the properties of the church, but for several years the church is secularized, or first they make the clergy civic officials, and then steal a lot of their property. So that great monasteries like Cluny that had existed since the Middle Ages are just torn down in the Revolution. There's one tower left of Cluny, and it used to be one of the biggest churches in Christendom.
It makes the riots in France look like a barbecue.
Yep.
Tiny little barbecue.
And the French did that to themselves, insofar as we define French, right? It's like they're tearing down the monasteries. Oh, brace yourself. This one's going to be hard. Are you ready? They destroy all the dovecotes too. They make all the pigeons homeless. If you have all of the pigeons wandering around European cities pooping on the buildings, it's because their homes are gone. There used to be dovecotes for them to live in. And it was one of the very first things on August 4th, when the French the French nobility and clergy agreed to destroy the Ancien regime. Article 2, they get rid of the dovecotes. I killed.
You see what my people.
Kilts is never going to recover from this.
It's just another strike against French everything.
They got rid of the doves.
Because I can't even deal with that. Why would you do it?
I'm going to move on from the heads on pikes. Oh, now we have liberty leading the people in 1830.
I'm so
as
sad.
Painted by Delacroix, as immortalized in Les Miserables, which is written later. She's got boobs, right?
I'm
Is
sad
that,
now.
are we only
Oh,
happy,
the boots chick.
happy about what happened because she's got boobs and a flag? And we say, liberty! This is what the French do for the rest of the 19th century. Is every other, every other reign, they have another riot in the streets. Right? So what...
It sort of becomes a hobby for the French at that point, right?
Yes, and if you've actually read Les Miserables and paid attention, the barricades go up, and he has this great description. This is Victor Hugo. Great description on the one hand of the barricade that was all like orderly and well built, and the other one that was just like, a heap of rubbish. But one way or the other, Parisians in their own city arm themselves against each other and build barricades so that they have little forts in the middle of the street, and then throw cobblestones at each other.
Kind of like what was going on last week.
Oh, do you mean that the Africans have learned how to be Parisian? It
seems like they've assimilated perfectly into French society. They've become French.
I think truly people just don't know enough French history to realize how many times this happened. Barricades. So even in Terry Pratchett in Night Watch has a great rendition of the barricades, which I think he's playing off of Victor Hugo's version of it, which everybody's seen because they've seen Les Miserables, which I haven't, but I read Victor Hugo or listened to it on audiobook. They did this multiple times, riots in the streets, right? I mean, I think that's why the yellow vests are like, moderately effective or not, right? It's like the French just know how to protest, that they do it in the streets. They're much more effective. Americans, we just do, parades, I guess, occasionally.
Yeah. No, the French riot.
Mm-hmm.
Like they know how to riot. So this was my fascination with the responses that everybody was giving to the French situation, blaming immigration, blaming mass immigration. The most simplistic way of explaining what is going on in France is to say that you've got too many foreigners in France and therefore the multicultural experiment is a disaster.
Mm-hmm. That
is a simple way of describing it. I think the more accurate way of describing it is you have too many Normans and French people that don't know what it means to be French, except for rioting. There's no homage in France anymore. This is a post-revolutionary population that have had several centuries of toxic philosophy running the society. There's no cross and crown. There's no sort of Saint Maurice that's mythologically uniting France together. I don't really know what exists for France as a mythological union, except for that woman with her top off running through the street.
It's that one in the La Marseillaise, right? Interesting. That's it, right? Interesting that they burned the library there, right? I mean, it's interesting if in fact that was the library getting burned. It's like the problem with all of what's happened is they've forgotten their own history. Thanks to, I mean, in the revolution, they try to redo the calendar so they have year one. It's very confusing studying the revolution because you have to, sometimes you're dealing with Thermidor and I don't know what that means, right? Is they rename all the months. They want to start the calendar again. They reorganize France so it's decimal. Talk about decimating, right? The structures of the government and such are made, to fit into the new enlightened sets of tens. And there is a revival of the church in the 19th century, but the ideal that I understand of France now, from one graduate student I had who was working on this concept in sort of cultural terms, is the laïcité. Since particularly the 1870s, when they've had several waves of anti-clericalism and so forth. That the French now, I mean, it's not just godless liberalism. It's like they define themselves as a secular state, so much so that they don't even know how many people are Catholic, because it's America. We may be one way or another about this, that, or the other, but at least on our census, we believe in asking people what religion they are, so that we might have like some accurate social data. The French can't ask; it's illegal. They literally have no idea how many people of any religion, how many French of any religion identify as anything, because they don't find out. They don't ask.
Thanks, Jacobins.
Yep. They're so secularized that they, they're so laic that they do not have a sense of, and the thing is, their own religion, this is like the wokeness of the United States going against all sorts of, actual religion, well, true religion, which is Christ. That they if they're not French, they're nothing, because they are in a state where they have to worship the state or have no identity. Although there are French Catholics who are, fairly active in a lot of cultural ways, but they're kind of invisible because of the way the French government completely denies that religion exists, which could give us some clue on why the people that live there are Muslim, don't like being erased in these terms. Now that is where that, so we're nearly to the point where we've completely dismantled, I hope, the simplistic version of things that people have started with. I don't think we're going to have time to do the other side of all of this, which is what Christians should be doing. But to say France, I mean, it's not just that they only have race in the national, the international media to describe what's going on. They don't have in France the same terms to even talk about it as, for example, in Germany, at least they know people are Christian. In France, nobody is admittedly Christian in the terms of the government, because they're not allowed to find out.
Yeah, it's the croissant utopia.
Yep.
Yeah. That's, I mean, it's a vending machine. This is what I would describe as a vending machine. But France is not what it used to be. It's now become an imperial vending machine. And it's churning people up within it to be spat out as something called French without anything really defining French identity. They have French accents. That's it. They speak French. That's it. But beyond that, you can apply to go to France and become French. So then it's a bureaucratic process. There's paperwork involved. Okay, so we understand that because that's a kind of civic nationalism. Right. People that argue against civic nationalism are going to say, oh, well, that's not real nationalism because you have to be racially French in order to become French, or to be French. But to be racially French, that doesn't account for all of the odd examples of people joining in the tapestry of France and making France what it is. Like the Dumas family, who are like a complicated colonial phenomenon, that the family Dumas have really they've been fundamental in creating French identity, and themselves, like,
by modern definitions, wouldn't count.
By modern definitions, would not count as being French.
Right.
They would be Darwinized and referred to in racial fractions, and then there would be a discussion on the blood quantum. Exactly how French are these men? Oh, well, it's okay because 4 or 5 generations down, they're not really black anymore. They're not Africans. Well, that's not really accurate in terms of genetics.
Right.
But the thing is, genetics can't account for nationalistic identity either, because if it did, then I would be French. I can't even pronounce French words. So, you know what I mean? Like, what then are you as a kind of output of French colonialism? The vending machine just kind of threw everyone out all over the planet. And then the people that came into France, like the Vikings from the north and Rollo and the people that formed France, created an entire region out of being imports, Normandy. Okay, so it's way too simplistic for me for everyone to have a conversation about what's going on in that vending machine and put it on a level of skin color. It doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, so what we've actually realized is, so civic. I actually agree with the civic nationalist criticism. It's like saying that you are a citizen on paper. Although there are ways in which, medieval Europe invents paper citizenship by ways of privileges given to cities, where if you live there for a year and a day, you count as a citizen. But those are these local communities deciding you have to come in and you have to behave like you belong to our community and behave according to certain rules and so forth. So indeed, civic nationalism is civis, it's city nationalism. So there's another conversation there. But saying that, yes,
So that
people are not.
Sorry, that would be more.
Go ahead.
Oh, that would be more like city-states, not like a
Right.
modern nation state as we know
Well,
it.
modern nation states develop out of the need to field giant armies.
Okay.
And you give them uniforms. I mean, it's interesting that Dumas, granddad, was military, right? Because much of it's interesting. All of the things that have been happening in the last few years have finally taught me more about early modern history than I ever was able to appreciate before. That the modern armies that march in formation, like now, the the Russians use, or the Americans use when they want to show off their power. That kind of formation army is a artifact of the 17th century, with the imperial. So, and you need a nation. Nations are defined by the men that will put on the uniform and die for you in those terms. And then you end up with this whole sort of mythology of patriotism, of dying for your country. And then you end up with World War I and World War II and so forth, right? So there's a military level to modern nationalism, always has been. That's why these banners are actually military flags. There's a city citizenship level in the civic nationalism part. We've established that there's this Darwinian problem in terms of the way in which you think of groups belonging to each other or not because of these fractions. And then there's actual people, ethnos, kinship, nation.
Yeah.
And I like what we've worked through tonight. It's like saying there are all these different levels of identity that the black-white race war caricature completely. I mean, it's not even just it obliterates it. It's like it's antithetical to, because it itself is another kind of mythological political construction.
Yeah. It is. It's obliterated in Egypt, which is why I overemphasize elements of Egyptian history and elements of Coptic history, because Egypt is where black on white and white on black goes to die. It's not, Egypt does not follow those rules. And so the rage against the Netflix Cleopatra, that wasn't the Egyptians angry because they'd cast a dark-skinned woman as Cleopatra. They were angry because American racial Bolshevists have decided to ignore Egyptian history and to Americanize it by blackwashing, as America does, because America can't think like Egypt. It thinks in America, thinks black on white, white on black. It's stuck in that binary. The Egyptians were angry because they said, hold on, the Ptolemaics were Greeks from Macedonia. We had Greek dynasty here. You can't ignore the Greek contribution to the Egyptian civilization. This is why they're angry, because they think like ancient people. They understand all of the different elements that have been poured into Egypt, and all of these different peoples and cultures and religions and languages and things that go into that giant melting pot of Egypt. And it doesn't melt. It's creolized. They've really
you need a better metaphor. Melting pot's not a good one.
Melting, but it's a terrible one. I'm trying to think of a different one.
They're tapestries. You can follow threads that go to.
Yes.
Yeah. More so than mosaic. Yeah, tapestry is like that, because there's you could take this one thread and follow all of these families back to this. You take this other one, and those are connected too, and that we are not kidding. We say you've got to study more history, because the massive spell that keeps getting cast over everybody is of amnesia, of being told over and over and over again that the world is this cartoonishly simple place of like, it's not even sports rivalries, because people usually know those better than they know other histories, right? They'll know all the players and when who was in charge of which team and where they used to be and such. Like, you need to know history at that level to appreciate the complexities of what rivalries are going on now. And we're gonna have to do a part 2 on this, because I think we've nearly come to our time on this one, and I have more to say, and it's not going to happen in 10 minutes. That there are deep threads and curiosities going on in what's happening in France right now, but it's not, it's not as simple as these are Africans. They're destroying churches for a reason.
Yes. Yes. The problem with developing a vending machine, a Jacobin vending machine, and declaring that the thing that makes you French is liberty, equality, fraternity, is that the rest of the planet don't operate on Jacobin rules. And so,
well, America keeps trying to.
Yeah. America is interesting because America thinks that it can impose Americanization on the rest of the planet. And it has attempted to do this, and I think it's failing. And it's America sort of edge tests and then figures out that it's striking borders that it can't penetrate, it can't break. There's a border in the Mediterranean. It's an invisible border. People can't see it anymore. They used to see it really clearly. And the simple thing is, like, people will say, oh, there's a language barrier. In America, they had a color line. You had a one-drop policy. It was who could pass. If you could pass as white and try and get away with it, that was fine. Like, all of these different places have had these invisible borders. The Mediterranean has an invisible border. That's religion. And France has created this vending machine system where it's broken the national boundaries and created colonies all over Africa. And the Jacobin system, the Jacobin France mentality, is that you come in and you have liberty and equality and fraternity without any caveat. There's no condition there. It's just a kind of open invitation. Sort of, there's, if you look at it as like a job application, you go, okay, liberty, that sounds good. Equality, yeah, that sounds fantastic. Fraternity, fantastic. What actually creates those three things? There's no reference point for it. The French have invited a huge amount of people into France, and they've taken over other colonies, they've taken over other areas of the planet, and they've dominated populations of people who did not believe in the Jacobin system. And then that Mediterranean border, that religious border, means that the people that they've brought into the Jacobin secular France have brought with them a religion, which makes that a complete impossibility. And that's probably another conversation. I think we need to have.
We'll never get. So we'll give you a hint where we would go, because here we have the Virgin of Montserrat.
No. Well, you work on Black Madonnas. You've been talking about the Black Madonnas.
I love how, okay, so this is we're gonna shame and name. No, we're not. We're just gonna shame. That I had someone in my channel coming after you for being cliched about these ladies, our Black Madonnas, and saying how common it was to keep invoking them. And I'm like, honey, back off my girl. That's mine. Nigra sum sed formosa. Right. And this is what hilariously, so interestingly, nobody really works on these Black Madonnas because nobody knows what to do about them, because we have no idea why they're black. Although they seem, we've got a bunch of them. This one's at Montserrat in Spain, right? We have this one in France. These are not ones I necessarily know. Here's a painting of them. It's like they're oh, this is Veronica with the black face of Christ. Queen of Sheba. I'll go back to the Black Madonnas. That, at various times people have said, oh, these Madonnas are black because the soot from the candles. It's like, that's nonsense, because the rest of the statue's not black. Their clothes aren't black, right? So they're clearly meant to be black. I think it's probably from the Song of Songs, saying, because the Song of Songs is used so much to describe Mary in the liturgies. And I have written books about this. Kilts is right. I am actually literally one of the experts on this. So much so, this is delightful. My dissertation on Virgin Mary and the Song of Songs was recently translated into French and published by Honoré Champion. So my book, I can't speak French, but my book can, right? And showing the way in which it's so important that the Song of Songs itself is used to describe Mary, and that this one verse of it, "I am black but beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem," is used over and over and over again in Mary's liturgies. And so it makes sense that I mean, again, it's like with Saint Maurice. Medieval Europeans will make images of Mary as black. And this has nothing to do with modernity or diversity or immigration or anything. It's the theological reality of what it means to say, I am, in scripture described as black but beautiful. And there they are. And so there's these, I mean, the statues seem to be fairly common in the south of France, which is interesting. But whether they're meant to be showing Mary as, quote, racially black, or whether it's a, spiritual black that the Song of Songs is evoking, one way or another, they're showing Our Lady as black.
Yes.
And I rather think that these images are going to suffer the same kind of attention as the churches have. And therefore it has zero to do with whether or not they're being represented as black.
African Muslims would not look on that and say,
"Oh, goody,
thank you
she's
for
black.
representing the Madonna as a black woman." No.
And although they do revere her as from the Quran, but no, right? It's like, this is...
Oh, they give her respect, but images to venerate? No.
Right.
No.
So we've been saying this all along. I think now we've hopefully set this up well enough to say this is a religious war. Race is being used by the secular liars to make you think that that's what's going on, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not a race war.
It's not a race war.
And we've had feedback, somebody saying that it may as well be because they see it like that. No, they don't. They absolutely do not see it like that. One of my comments on the phenomenon of immigrating into a country like this, because I've had to do a reverse migration and then return to the West. So I was born in the West and then left it. Went to Africa and came back into the West. So I've had to do a reverse immigration, and I've had a reverse culture shock. Coming back to the West after being in Africa is horrible. It's actually a horrible experience. The secularism smacks you in the face. After you've been in a culture that talks about God openly, praises God openly, even in the language, in the greeting to say salam alaikum, peace be upon you, that phrase comes from Christ. The Muslims picked it up from a Christian practice of the Middle East. When your language is saturated in religion, and then you move back into a vending machine that has bleached itself of all religious identity to have a secular croissant utopia or a hamburger utopia like America or Australia, the kangaroo utopia down here, the language is bleached of religion, it's bleached of ethnic flavor, and then you have to fit into it, knowing what you're coming back into is the kind of it's race death. You've got two options: you can integrate into it or you can fight it. So I know this experience. The secular utopias are coming to an end. They are not sustainable. And for people that have grown up in a culture where the language is saturated in faith, they can see these republics for what they really are. That will be my my final observation of the of the thing.
We've got some super chats going on. All right, Buzzsaw Bear, you're gonna need to, I'll read these for you, and then you have to take them on. So Buzzsaw Bear is saying, take a bunch of crayons and put them into a melting pot. They'll turn out gray. Yes, right. Melting pot is a poor analogy for the way history happens. Buzzsaw Bear. Muhammad Ali said bluebirds should be with bluebirds.
Muhammad Ali was not at all educated on Arabic history or the Islamic civilizations of the old world.
Taking him as an
fully
authority. Yes,
fully to
Cassius
him.
Clay needs
No.
to like. Okay, Buzz Salbear, this is actually super chat. Thank you. How many Frenchmen does it take to defend Paris? Casey responds to him, go to Sacré-Cœur in Paris, Buzzsaw. You'll see African Catholics defending the church there. Frenchmen, who knows? Catholics, well, Buzzsaw Bear. Oh, one church, great. The answer for Paris is we haven't found out yet. No one has. Casey's doing yeoman service for us in the chat. I mentioned that church because it was an African neighborhood. It's not just the one church. What's IOW mean? In other words, Buzzsaw Bear. Okay, that's not a super chat, so I'm not gonna. Buzzsaw Bear is making the accurate observation that some people want to have us fighting each other and to set us up for these fights, and we should consider that you are being enticed into fighting people whom you should be bringing to Christ by false categories of humanity. And this is not to say there's not ethnic differences or that there's not large population differences between the peoples of the great ancient continents, Africa, Europe, and Asia, although there's only Eurasia and Africa. So one big continent and another big continent. Right? That's not what we're saying. We're saying that you have been fed lies by modernity into misunderstanding the complexity of our own perpetual interaction across those great regions of the ancient world. And it's interesting that, you know, those of us who are living outside of that ancient world in our mixed up histories still want, I mean, it's like, it's way easier to think in caricatures and simple binaries than it is in the full complexity of the tapestry of human history, which includes that sword that the Austro-Hungarian emperors used until the last Austro-Hungarian emperor was crowned, right? Until World War One.
Yes, and then Austro-Hungary was collapsed
by the British.
Yes. Yeah.
Who were Norman? No, wait.
Yeah. Yeah, Hungary's a trip. But
but it's saying that you guys, you really, really, really need to learn some more history. Otherwise, we're just not going to be impressed.
Well, it also means that if you can't think in complicated ways like this, you're listening to the Radio Rwanda, and then you've got no way of fighting against it.
Right. Because they're going to try to turn you into simple binaries to make you fight each other. And the only thing that happens is your neighbors get their limbs hacked off, or you do.
Yeah. And you can say, oh, it's great, bring it on all you want, but I would recommend going to the Genocide Museum in Rwanda before too enthusiastic about those kinds of things.
Okay, I think Buzzsaw Bear has only started commenting now, and we've been talking for 2 hours, so I think these are off-topic questions, but since it's a super chat, I will read it. Does the Ten Commandments differentiate between murder and killing? I think this is a topic for a different stream.
Yeah.
Okay. But Casey has, I think, the best last word. The Protestant House of Saxe-Coburg has a lot to answer for. So, I have learned some medieval history thanks to my loyal pigeon guide. Good job.
Thank you. Yeah, this was fun. Hopefully if you guys can, watch the stream, read the article again if you've already read it, and start to think about Europe as a continent who thought in a continent that thought in sainthood and not race.
Yeah. Just
do it as an experiment, and it might clarify a lot of things that have been happening to the European population since World War One.
I mean, also Europe has, as a continent that's actually been in contact with the rest of the world for centuries. I mean, to imagine that what's happening now is simply Europe has been purely removed from everybody else, and this is the first time a great invasion has happened. No, but I mean, it's like we haven't even done the Battle of Tours Poitiers yet, right? The experience of Europe on the edge of the Eurasian continent was one of perpetual invasion. So tonight we talked about the Vikings or the Normans, but in the centuries in which Charlemagne only manages to have his empire, basically Louis the Pious, his son, holds on to it for a bit, and then his grandsons break it up. But they're under attack not just from the Normans, but also from the Muslims and also from the Magyars, who become the Hungarians. And Otto, the one who had that sword of Maurice, Otto the First manages to stop the Magyar advance at the Battle of Blackfield in 955. His son manages to marry a Byzantine princess, Theophanu, and Otto the Third, who is emperor at the year 1000, and they celebrate the Feast of the Assumption in Rome and so forth, is the son of a Byzantine princess. The intermarriage and the mixing and the problem with the invasions is European history. And that book that Kilts can see from where she's sitting, where Gibbon talks about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and pats himself on the back as at the height of the Enlightenment, the English have figured out how to survive all of this. Ironically, there's a chapter in it in which he claims that the reason that Europe is so strong is because it's had so many different nations all battling each other the whole time, and so they've gotten stronger. Homogeneity is yet another Darwinian fantasy, I think.
Mm.
Buzzsaw Bear, starting to not care so much about history but the future. You don't get to. We live in time. We are creatures of time. If you have no history, you have no memory, and you don't learn anything ever.
It also makes no sense. How can you have a vision for the future when you don't understand where you've been?
Well, apparently people can live on the internet and can't remember yesterday. So we hope now you remember that sword. If nothing else, remember that sword that Maurice refused to wield against Christians, and which the Holy Roman Emperors held as their badge of office to defend Christianity.
Yeah. Saint Maurice, pray for us.
Saint Maurice, pray for us. To be continued. Because we actually did have more that we were thinking about talking about tonight, but I think this deserved unpacking in full. You guys can, we're going to keep talking about, we're starting up. So we've got next week is our last official week of season 1, because it's will be 52 weeks. And then we figure we should flip over into a new catalog of episodes, because otherwise the website gets too complicated. We are going to continue talking about women and what we really want. And we're going to tell you guys once we not figure it out. I think we know, but sometimes we're not saying it out loud as clearly as we ought to.
We're going to be blunt next week.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah. So finale of season 1, the end of July, What Women Really Want, part 2 of however many parts, because we're complicated and you guys are desperate to know what we think. We hope. If you haven't subscribed yet to the Dragon Common Room list, you're missing the newsletters that go out every Friday, and they will have special goodies and guides to help you find your way through all of these stories that we've been weaving in our journeys, both in our storytelling through our poetry and in the Mosaic Arc. So like and subscribe, but subscribe in our Dragon Common Room list so you get the newsletters.
You need the newsletters as a stop off, I think.
No, we appreciate that not everybody follows all the threads that we do as religiously as we do. So if you get lost, we're making a map, right? The newsletters will give you a map to all the different parts of the things that we're working on. And we promise to keep doing those weekly too. So please sign up. This week's newsletter has a really special treat to point you to. So you're going to want it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And this dove has a home back in the Ark, so I'll take care of her. No revolutionary dove kit destruction.
No, stop smashing them. Please build them again.
No. We have proper
somewhere to live.
Home. Take care of the home pigeons. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.